So today we're talking about the Zerno Z1, and I've had this one on my bar for just over a year now, and this one for several months. And today we're going to answer the question, are they still worth considering? We're going to talk about who they're for, who maybe they're not for. We're going to talk about the updates that Zerno has made to these over time. We're also going to talk about some critiques and comments that I have after using them for an extended period of time. Now, full transparency before we get into this, I review a ton of equipment on this channel, and basically all of it is sent to me by somebody or other. Nobody has any input into these reviews. Nobody gets to see them, comment on them, approve them, any of that. I always give my full thoughts and criticisms about the things I review, so you're always getting my real perspective, at least as it comes to being an enthusiast and a reviewer. In my initial review of the Z1, both of the grinders that I had came courtesy of a friend of mine at Homebrew Coffee. Great guy, great follow. These ones came later. I went to the SCA Expo, which is a giant specialty coffee expo last year, and the guys at Zerno sent me home with this unit. It is Z1 serial number 505, so it was the 505th unit. This one came just a couple months ago from the Zerno team, and it is serial number 2111, so about 2,000 units into their production run. Now, if you're here and you're brand spanking new to the Z1, just a couple really quick things to orient you. The beans go in here. There's no variable RPM, very simple switch, turn it on and off on the side here. It's a stepless grind adjustment, meaning you have infinite adjustability on here. And the grind dial is in microns or micrometers. So you're getting actually a measurement rather than just an arbitrary number. Fit and finish, really nice, top tier, all hand built in the US, fantastic. Now, normally when I review something, I'll do an overview of how it works, share all my pros and cons, and then talk about who the thing is for. I think with the Z1, we actually need to start with who this grinder is for. I call the Z1 the ultimate enthusiast's grinder. So, if you're the type of person, you want to get in there and tweak every variable and swap out components and really try and optimize for exactly what you're looking for, you're going to find a bunch of like-minded people in the Z1 community. That being said, say if you're just looking for a casual, seamless experience, maybe even you're just getting into espresso and you just want a really nice grinder without a lot of fuss, there is value that the Z1 brings that you may not actually leverage. So if you're in that position, I may actually push you in another direction. There really is a little bit of a learning curve to these things, not really in daily use, but in learning how to optimize them to get exactly what you want out of a cup. You see, the Z1 really opened up a new way of looking at these kind of upper end coffee grinders. It used to be when you would go shopping for a coffee grinder, you would be looking at a specific one and it would come from the factory with one, maybe two configurations, but more or less the grinder was what it was. And if you got it, you were expecting a certain thing. There were very small numbers of enthusiasts who would mod their grinders and swap in different parts to try and get it to be a certain thing that they wanted. And the Zerno team took that kind of mod mentality and really developed a whole product around it. Z1s are bespoke, made by hand in a small factory, configured to a very specific spec by individual customer. There are actually right now 6 different burr sets that you can get these configured with. You can order more than one burr set with your Z1. And on top of that, there's actually 2 Prebreaker designs that you can pair with any one of those burr sets. So you can kind of open up different possibilities when it comes to how the grinder is functioning and how it's grinding the beans. Beyond that, they've built in future complexity that they actually haven't implemented yet. Things like the pre-breaking chamber, you can put in a different shaped chamber. You can also drop in any other set of standard 64 millimeter coffee burrs. So when you're asking, what is the grinder good for? What does it do well? It really depends on the actual configuration that you get it with. So for enthusiasts, this is a very good thing. If you may not call yourself an enthusiast, you just want a really great coffee grinder, this could maybe be a little overwhelming even figuring out how to get it configured. Now, I definitely fit into that enthusiasts category. So from an enthusiast standpoint, how has my year with the Z1s been? Well, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that it's been great. The Z1s are fantastic grinders and they work extremely well. They're not a perfect grinder though, and if that's what you're looking for, I always say you're going to be looking for a long time, because every grinder, even expensive ones like this, they all have compromises, so it's just a matter of understanding what those compromises are. For me, I keep the Z1s on bar, and I have kept them on bar for the last year for a couple very specific reasons that are specific to my context. From a technical standpoint, I've tested 4 Z1 units by this point, and any one of those units shipped with a tighter alignment tolerance than any other grinder that I've tested. I'll usually start with something called a wipe test, where basically you put a little bit of dry erase marker around your burr, and then you turn the grinder on or turn the burr manually and slowly get them closer together until they start to rub. And then when you pull it apart and you see where the marker has been rubbed off, you can get a sense of how close to alignment the burrs are. And for all the Z1s that I tested, it was basically a clean wipe across the board, no matter what burrs I had in there. From there, you can do something called a chirp-to-lock test. And that's where you turn the grinder on and you slowly tighten the dial until you just hear the burrs start to touch. You turn it off, and then you continue turning and you see where the dial kind of stops moving. That would be your lock point. And the smaller the distance between those 2 points, in theory, the better your alignment. It's not a perfect test. There are some issues with it, but it's easy to do, and it does give you a pretty good ballpark of how tight that type of alignment is in here. And after doing all these tests, there was no grinder, certainly from the factory, that came as tightly aligned as any of the Z1s I tested. What I really appreciated, though, about the Z1's alignment is they hold it when you disassemble the grinder and put it back together. But not only that, they also hold the alignment even when you're taking out entire burr sets and putting in new ones. That is very high performance, especially for how easy it is to actually take these apart and do a burr swap. Now, the question I always get asked is, can I get away with a less expensive grinder? And I say, yeah, you can get another grinder that doesn't cost as much as a Z1. You can take it apart, you can take your measurements, you can align those burrs to be in much tighter alignment than they came from the factory. People do this kind of thing all the time. The issue is you need to do that every time you want to change burrs. So for somebody like me, I'm changing burrs all the time. Not having to worry about alignment at all ever is just really nice. Now, on top of that, the Z1s also ship with something called blind burrs, but most 64mm flat burrs come with 3 screw holes, and that mounts the burr to what's called the carrier inside. And the Z1 is a little bit different. They use a special configuration without those screw holes, and that is called a blind burr mount. So when you get in here into the Z1 and you can just pop out the carrier, you'll see that there are no screw holes on there. And if you're wondering how quick it is to actually change a burr set, you just grab the burr. These blind burrs are magnetic, and you can just pop it off. There'll be a little bit of coffee grounds in there, of course, but then your burr is off. And they also include these burr pullers, which are designed to get this static burr out. And it also comes out very easily, just like that. So when you're talking about changing burr sets and how quickly and easily you can do that, there just isn't another grinder that does it as quickly as the Z1. Now, anytime you're doing this kind of thing, when you put it back together, you're going to want to make sure that all your surfaces are super clean. If there's any coffee grounds in there at all, in behind the burrs, that is going to have an impact on your alignment and throw it out. But when you are all cleaned up and you're ready to put it back together, you just slide everything in. It all snaps together like this, and then you can slide the burr carrier back in, put your front faceplate back on, put your screws in, and you are back in business with a totally different burr set. We'll talk about a couple instances where I found there are a few hitches here and there, but overall, if you're doing this regularly and you kind of get in the flow with it, you can be done this in about the same amount of time as I just showed you here on camera. It's very fast to do. Now, people disagree about how much impact those blind burrs have on the actual flavor of the coffee that you're grinding up. I mean, my intuition tells me that there's got to be some impact. I mean, you're looking at these giant screw holes on the face of other burrs and you're saying, oh, it doesn't really have that kind of impact. I think there probably is some impact. What I can tell you for sure the blind burrs have an impact on are how quick that process is. It just takes a lot longer with screwed burrs. So if you want to be swapping burrs as a part of your enthusiast journey, really good fit with the Z1. And for me, you know, if I'm reviewing another grinder and I want to compare it against, say, 3 different burr sets, you know, I can just do that a lot more quickly with these things on bar. Now, retention, we are going to talk about that. You saw a little bit of retention there come out, so we are going to get there. But performance isn't the only thing that has made these things stick for me, you know. They look great, they're a pleasure to use and interact with on a daily basis, and I think this is a really underrated feature about the Z1s. They're very compact. They don't take up a lot of room. You know, there are lots of great grinders out there. Many of them are very large, and these ones just fit into a very nice compact zone. Really helps with the partner approval and makes for a nice spacious brew bar too. Now that we've considered all that though, we have to consider something else, and that is the price. A base line Z1 comes in at just over $1,300 US. Once you add in a single SSP burr set, which is what most people will end up configuring these with, that price moves up to $1,449 US. If I were to get this Z1 today, configured with all of the burrs that I have for it, as well as the 2 Prebreakers that I have for it, and this kind of trim level with this stainless steel cap up here, it would come in at $2,319 in black and $2,369 in white. So when someone says a Z1, you know, they're $1,300, it really depends on the configuration that you're hoping to get. Now, you can start with a base one and add in some things over time. Most people are going to end up spending a little bit more to get their spec and configuration that they're looking for. Now, the grinder that I get asked about the most in comparison to these two is definitely the Mazzer Philos grinder. It comes in at about $1,000 US, and they're readily available. You don't got to go on a waiting list, wait for them to configure your unit and ship it out to you, any of that. You order it and it ships to you right away. And as far as alignment performance goes, the Philoses came in second after the Z1s out of all the other grinders that I've tested over the years that I've been doing this. They are very well aligned for a mass-produced factory grinder. Overall, they're great grinders, and if you don't need some of the specific advantages that the Z1 offers, that could be a fantastic direction to go in. Another question that I got asked a lot when I put this out on social media that I was going to be dropping this video was, you know, do you use the Z1 for espresso or filter? And I even got asked, like, what grind size do you recommend for the Z1? And again, that really is going to come down to the specific configuration. Now, I'm going to be making another video using these two grinders to do some pretty detailed comparisons on the different burr sets that are available and even the different combinations of Prebreakers that you can put with different things. Overall, you can get really good use cases for both espresso, filter, or somewhere in the middle. If you're considering one of these, I would strongly recommend considering one of the SSP burr sets to go with them. I would say the HU burrs offer the closest to a traditional espresso profile without losing a lot of clarity. The Cast V2 burrs, you can use them for both filter and espresso. They lean a little bit to sweetness and complexity with a bit of a bent towards filter. The Cast V3s similarly are an omni-use burr, again leaning to sweetness and complexity but pushing further on the espresso side. The SSP MPs are a multi-use burr. I would say if you really like clarity and turbo espresso, those are a good option. And as far as pure filter use, I really like the SSP brew burrs. They call them the UMV1s. And those burrs are going to give you a lot of tea-like clarity and flavor separation without some of the harshness that can come sometimes from the MPs. Those ones are not suitable for espresso though. So those are my really condensed thoughts on the burrs. For espresso, I used to be almost like 100% on the HUs, and now I kind of tend to flip between HUs and CV3s. I find especially on flat profile espresso machines like semi-automatics and that, the HUs can allow you to build a pressure a little bit more easily. They have a little bit of a wider sweet spot and they're still giving you pretty decent clarity. The CV3s, they have a really nice bite, but you have to grind super fine with them. They can be a little hard to tune on a flat profile machine, but if I'm using something like the Robot, it's very often that I'll use the CV3s. Filter, I am 100% basically on the Brew Burrs, the UMV1s when I'm using the Zerno. I really like those burrs, super clear, not a lot of edge. They took a lot to season, but they're really nice. One question that I get asked a lot actually when it comes to these things is how often am I actually changing the burrs? And even though I kind of have favorite burr sets for kind of daily use, I actually change burrs quite a bit with these things. 1 to 2 times a week, very often both grinders, I have the burr sets out and another burr set in. Now, most of that is for testing and reviewing rather than kind of just daily enjoyment, but it happens a lot. I think if I actually wasn't reviewing gear as much as I do, then I would probably not change the burrs quite as much. Probably would still a little bit, you know. Let's talk about the Prebreakers very briefly. It's another thing that you can configure on the Z1. Pre-breaking is kind of breaking up the coffee a little bit before it gets to the burrs themselves, and that has a couple advantages. Number one, it slows down the rate at which the coffee is actually delivered to the burrs, which is a very good thing, because if all of the coffee kind of slams up and into those burrs all at the same time, it's going to spin in and around in there faster than it can actually get ejected, and that is something that is called regrinding, and it's going to result in a less consistent grind than you may want. Pre-breaking moves the roadblock earlier in the process and delivers a more controlled feed rate to the burrs. It also delivers particles to the burrs that are a little bit smaller size, which helps with this as well. The Z1 currently has 2 pre-breakers available, a medium feed V2, which I got recently with this one, and a slow feed auger. For me, people ask me, can you tell the difference? I think I can tell the difference. And could that be confirmation bias? Yes. But I'm going to dive more deeply into that with some very detailed comparisons in that upcoming Burr and Prebreaker content. If you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe. So overall, we've covered some good ground here. Alignment performance, we've talked about different Burr options, configuration, overall positioning, strategy of the Z1, who this may be a good fit for and who it may not be a good fit for. I think this is probably a good time to talk about some cons, and maybe even you don't call them cons, but maybe you call them considerations of this grinder. And top consideration for me is probably the positioning of these things and the availability. You know, these really are an enthusiast grinder. And if you're not in that mindset of this is kind of a hobby for you, you're really leaving some of the value on the table when it comes to these things. And on top of that, they haven't been terribly available. You know, you would have to pay to go on a wait list, and then that would just even give you the opportunity to pre-order. Then you had to pre-order, they would have to make them, and then months later you would get your unit. Zerno has been working on scaling their operations for some time, and they're just on the cusp right now of offering general availability. They're not quite there yet, but it is apparently coming soon. That will help. Still though, this is definitely an enthusiast piece of equipment. A couple other things that you should consider. They've made some updates to the chute design over time from the launch. Originally, they were more staticky than they are now, for sure. I still find you really need to use RDT, which is a little spritz of water before you grind up your beans, in order to keep that static at bay. If you try and grind up coffee without doing that, it does get quite staticky. That being said, on filter and espresso with a bit of RDT, I don't really find it much of an issue, but I would say that that is probably a bit of a required workflow for these grinders. One little safety issue that James Hoffman pointed out, I can't believe how I didn't really think about this before, but it is totally a valid point. This chute just kind of pops off magnetically, which is fine. I actually clear out any kind of remaining static just by giving the chute a little flick like that. It's kind of nice and satisfying to put on and off, but when you take it off, you can still turn the grinder on. And when you do that, you can see the burr kind of spinning around right there. Like, it's right there. You could stick your finger in there and cause some damage to yourself. So that is definitely worth noting. Also, one thing that seems to be pretty polarizing about the Z1s is the sound. Some people really don't like the sound of these things. Doesn't seem to bother me too much, but it is a little bit higher pitched. There's a gearbox in here which makes that sound, and some people don't like it. It's not terribly loud, but it is a certain sound, I guess, and if it turns you off, it's something that you're gonna have to listen to every day. The actual sound of grinding does change a little bit depending on what burrs you have in there, so I'll just leave that overall to you. Retention is always a big conversation when it comes to high-end coffee grinders, and there are 2 types of retention. One is retention that's kind of left in there and is going to come out the next time you grind up some coffee. It's called exchange. And then there's retention, coffee grounds that will kind of stick around in there, but they kind of build up and don't really tend to come out very much. Some of that coffee that popped out that was kind of in between the Burr and the Prebreaker, that's coffee that kind of gets locked in there and doesn't really come out shot to shot, and I worry a little bit less about that. There are several nooks and crannies in the Z1 like that where the coffee can tend to build up. And just to see exactly how much would build up over time, I left in a set of Burrs, in this one actually, for 8 weeks, and I ground espresso every day, several times a day with it. I took it apart. I could see some grounds had built up kind of in this front housing in behind the rotating Burr. Again, that's not coffee that's likely going to come out. It's just going to kind of build up in behind there. Also in and around the Burrs, kind of on the edge, it will build up a little bit in there. All said and done, by the time I took apart all the carriers and took the Burrs out and got all the coffee off the Burrs and out of the housing and every little tiny bit of retention that I could get out of there that had kind of worked its way into a little groove, there was just over a gram of coffee in there. So it does build up, but also it's not really going to come out in your next shot on a regular basis. Where it does build up that you have to watch regularly is inside this chute, kind of right up in here and right up in this thing. And because I'm the way I am, and many enthusiasts are like this, I just kind of end up cleaning this area once every couple days. You know, I'll just take it apart. Maybe I'm about to brew a nice Gesha coffee and I want to make sure there's, you know, zero or as little retention in there as possible before I do so. I just give it a quick brush and that's it. And for me, that's not a big deal. That's just part of how I use my equipment. But some people may not want to worry about that. So that is one spot where retention can build up on the Z1s that I would recommend paying attention to and clearing out regularly. Another consideration is the RDT. If you don't want to have that in your workflow, I'm going to say your experience with the Z1 is going to be a lot less pleasant. And just a little nitpicky thing, I find this on this one for some reason, not so much on this one, but I find one bean will occasionally get stuck in here with the slow auger only. And I'll kind of need to turn the grinder on and off to actually get it to chew itself up. Also, very large beans like Pacamara or Marigot Hipe can sometimes get stuck in the chute and you need to kind of push them down in there to keep the feed going. So a couple overall positioning considerations, as well as a couple more nitpicky practical considerations. The power cable is something that some people don't necessarily love. It is removable. I found that when I got the white one, I wanted to replace it with a white power cable, so I did that. I guess there is one other consideration though. Just recently at this year's SCA Coffee Expo, Zerno released the Z2, which is kind of an evolution of the Z1. It's got 80 millimeter burrs, and it's actually just a little bit larger, not a lot larger, and it has variable RPM as well. And a couple people asked me, you know, should I get a Z1 or should I hold out for the Z2? And I think there's a pretty easy way to answer that question. What I would say is decide which burr size you kind of want to live in the world of and make your decision that way. Both of them are great grinders. Both of them are going to offer a lot of the same advantages. The Z2 has some nice little improvements with how the drivetrain works, and variable RPM is a nice feature, I guess. But I would say the deciding factor there more depends on whether you want to be in 64 millimeter burr world or 80 millimeter burr world. There's some burrs that exist in either one of those sizes that don't really have an analogous burr in the other size. I will say in 64 millimeter, there is just more options, but there are some very nice burrs available in 80 millimeter that don't have an equivalent in 64. So I would say if you're on that fence, you're wondering that, you're kind of curious what would Justin say, I would say make your decision based on which side of that you want to land on. Now, over time, the Zerno team has made a lot of updates to these grinders. You know, these guys are enthusiasts just as much as any person who would use these grinders. And they are interested in tweaking, optimizing, and improving their grinder. Now, one thing that they do as they're kind of going through that process, which I really appreciate, is they make everything backwards compatible. So if they release a new part, then it's likely going to work on any Z1. Recently, they released a new funnel and lid. This is that version. It's a little bit wider than the original, which is nice from a workflow standpoint. And the lid actually now fits on the dosing cup. So if you want to shake up your grounds a little aggressively before you dose it into your portafilter or whatever, you can do that with this lid. It kind of serves dual purpose. The dosing cups also are updated. You know, the original ones had this kind of flat bottom. It's a rounder bottom now to help the grounds slip out of there a little bit more easily. They have made the updates to the grinds chute compared to original. The very first ones had a 3D printed insert actually. This is a solid part now. They also got rid of the ionizer in here. I guess they found that it wasn't really making much of a difference when it came to reducing static or retention. The new chute seems to have improved a lot of that stuff to the point where the ionizer was having a negligible impact. Also, they have now partnered with Wera, I think it's called Wera tools, and this is the tool that now comes with the Z1. And users were a little mixed on this. You know, they used to ship with custom tools. You know, these kind of have a cool branded look. I think this is actually a nicer tool, but it doesn't have the cool factor that this does. The downside of this is, you know, people would use these wrong. They wouldn't like tighten this all the way when they were expanding it, or sometimes they didn't even realize that this could be expanded and you needed to recollapse it to get it back in the case, all that. So it's a little bit of give and take on that one, I would say. And they've also added the slow feed auger since my last review and made the updates to the medium feed auger more recently. Also, since my original review, they added a couple SSP blind Burr sets, which is really nice. And I'm sure, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure they got more in the pipeline too. So those are my kind of thoughts, I guess, on the Z1 after a year of using it, having it on bar. Really, really great grinder for enthusiasts, especially. I think it does things and offers value that just isn't present anywhere else in the market. You know, for what I'm doing, especially, you know, always comparing burrs and grinders and taking things apart and putting them back together and needing everything to be 100% consistent, I just haven't found parallel. So from that perspective, these things are just a really, really great tool. Now, does everybody need that? Of course not. But if you are into that kind of thing, the Z1 really has redefined what expectations for that type of coffee grinder look like. Now, if you'd like to check out my original review for the Z1s or my shootout against the Mazzer Philos, I'll leave both of those videos right here. I would love to hear from you, especially if you're a Z1 owner. You know, there was so much that I wanted to cram into this video, these niche little answers to questions that I just couldn't fit in. So please leave a comment down below and I will try and answer as many questions about the Z1 as I can. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic and we'll see you next time.